Fool me once, shame on me. No, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. You're not fooling me a second time. Do you believe in second chances? Because I'd like to. A couple of months ago, I was approached by a company called Oedro, I think that's how you pronounce it, and they asked if I wanted to try out any of their products, and the one I agreed to were the Forerunner side steps. But after I installed it, I wondered why they were sitting so low. And a lot of you got on me about it, like, yeah, those look horrible. So I started doing a little bit of research, and I quickly learned through my research and through many of your comments that these steps they sent me were actually made for the Forerunner Limited. To be fair, at the time, I really didn't know much about Forerunners. In fact, to this day, I'm still trying to find my way around the world of Toyota because I'm more familiar with Jeeps. And I knew that Forerunners had different trim models, but I didn't know that that extended to additional body parts. Like, I didn't know that Forerunner Limiteds had a lowered bottom because there's an extra piece of body kit there, which is why if I were to put these steps on a Limited, it would sit nice and flush and you wouldn't see the brackets at all. But is that Oedro's fault? No, that's on me. Like, I should have specified what kind of Forerunner I had, but at the same time, they should have also asked me what kind of Forerunner I had so that they could tell me, by the way, these steps are for the Limited, so if you have a TRD off-road, they might sit really, really low. But either way, that's neither here nor there. Point is, that's what leads us to today. They asked me if there were any other products I would like to review, so I went to their catalog and found that they had Jeep JK Fenders. So I said, yeah, send that over, I want to try it out, and that's what we're doing today. Now, the fenders they sent me are these super slim, super thin style fenders, and to be honest, when I first got the Jeep, I wasn't a fan of that look. I thought they looked like pieces of paper that were just stuck to the side of the Jeep like origami. I thought at the time, because I wasn't into overlanding or off-roading yet, that I was going to build this aggressive looking Jeep with these humongous fenders with the rivets in them. And yeah, as I started going overlanding and camping, the thin style fenders started to grow on me and I started to see why they were so advantageous. It gives you a lot more room in the wheel well, it gives you a lot more room for the wheels to articulate on you. But I also still like the OEM ones, which is why I wasn't in a rush to get them modded out. So when Oedro asked if I wanted to try out their Jeep JK fenders, I was like, okay, sure, send them over. It's not going to cost me anything. Plus, if it works out, then now I have a product to offer you because these are pretty affordable. So I'm hoping it really works out. I hope I don't get burned like I did with the Forerunner when I didn't know what I was doing. I know my Jeep, so I know whether or not this is going to fly. So let me open it up for you, show you the quality of it, and then let's install them and see how they perform. So for the sake of saving space on this table, here are the fenders for just the one side of the Jeep. I got the front over here and I've got the rears over here. The finish on it is a powder coated textured black. Build looks pretty good. It's cut pretty nice. I don't see any kind of chips. I don't see any kind of bends where it's supposed to be straight. But the thing that I'm really not liking though is the way they welded the two pieces together. If you look, it looks like just spot welding here and there. But that's what you get when you buy products that are not going to be premium. If you look at my ARB bumper, the welds on it are just impeccable and clean. Here, it looks like a machine just went in there, dropped in some welds, so I don't know how long that's going to hold up. It also does not utilize the brackets that are welded on the Jeep now that holds up the OEM fenders or any aftermarket fenders you might buy. As you can see, there's nothing there for that bracket to attach onto. So if you are the kind of person that uses your fenders to stand on, to get onto your roof rack or whatnot, then this is probably not going to be the option for you. But as far as the rear and the sides, that's not something I'm overly concerned about. For me, what was important is more so weight. I wanted to get something that was lighter and not going to hold down the Jeep any more than it already has been. So if it breaks on me, it is what it is. It didn't really cost me anything, and even if I did spend for these myself, I kind of already know what to expect putting $200 fenders on the Jeep. expectations are not super high. So if they do break, then we'll just replace it with fenders that are made by companies more known for their fenders. But before I even jump to that conclusion, let me at least give them the benefit of the doubt, try these out, and hope that they actually do work out for me.
The first thing I had to do was remove the inner fender liners, and I'll start with the pop rivets on the outside. The easiest way to do this is to use an awl and a hammer to pop the middle part of the rivets through. Then you'll be able to use a pop rivet removal tool to pry them out easily. Next, pry out the 6 plastic rivets on the inside of the wheel well, then take a 10mm socket to remove the 1 bolt holding the liner in place. After that, the liner should just come out. For the fender itself, disconnect the side marker lights, then use a 10mm bolt to remove the 4 bolts on the inside, then use a plastic trim removal tool to pry the fender from the body. Oh, and don't forget about the 10mm bolt on the support bracket like I just did, because this will happen.
My fault. That was a dumb move.
The rear fenders are much easier as it's only held in place by plastic rivets. Like the front, I started by removing the pop rivets holding the liner to the fender, then pried out a few rivets in the back. The only challenge is that it's hard to get leverage to pry out some of the rivets, so I just used pliers and pulled. With all the rivets removed, the inner fenders can come out. Then again, with the plastic removal tool, I was able to pry the fender from the body. Technically, you can remove both the outer and inner fenders as one big unit, but I wanted to remove them separately so I can see what I'm working with.
Okay, the stock fenders are off, so let me just pause right here. The truth about fenders. There are some things you need to know before you make a humongous mistake. Let me show you. Okay, starting with the front, issue number 1. See this thing? This is the bracket that holds your stock fender in place. It acts as a support and it is welded directly onto the Jeep. Depending on what fenders you buy, you may or may not have to chop this off. With this particular kit, the fenders are super thin and it does hide this a little bit, but you can still see it and it's kind of messy. So normally when people install these particular fenders on the Jeep, they just chop this off, grind it down, spray paint over it, and you are done. See what I mean? It does hide it a little bit, but it comes right to the edge of it, and so you can still see it, and there's a huge gap, and it looks messy. The problem is, I don't want to just be chopping this thing off, because what if I don't like these fenders, and I decide to get a different kind of fender that needs to use this? Well, now I'm screwed because I've chopped this off. So for the purpose of this installation, I'm gonna have to keep this thing on even if it looks messy, because I don't want to risk taking it off, getting new fenders later, and then now I'm screwed because I don't have a bracket as a support. Issue number 2. No matter what fenders you buy, you are most likely gonna have to install riv nuts. Riv nuts are basically rivets that have threads in them that you put into these holes so that it will allow you to install and screw in the fender to the body of your vehicle. The problem is, riv nuts are almost damn near impossible to remove. So once you put riv nuts on those mounting holes, if you decide to switch fenders later and that new fender doesn't use the same mounting holes as your old one did, well, now you have riv nuts there that will prevent you from putting the new fender flush to the vehicle because it creates a gap. All right, moving to the back, issue number 3. Same situation as the front when it comes to the riv nuts, except that in the rear, there are even more holes. And based on the installations I've seen of various fenders, they all use different hole combinations. If you're gonna put fenders back here, just know that if you decide to switch it out later, you might be using a whole different kind of mounting locations than the one you had previous. So what is the point of all this? The point is, when it comes to Jeep mods, sometimes what you do is reversible. Front bumpers, rear bumpers, if you put one on and you don't like it and you want to replace it with a new bumper, for the most part, they'll bolt up in the same place and you have nothing to worry about. But when it comes to fenders, sometimes you have to modify the body in order for you to mount those fenders on. And once you make those modifications, it's going to be much harder to switch to a different fender later. But because I know my Jeep, I am not yet 100% sold that these Oedro fenders are the ones that I want mounted on here permanently. There are just some styling issues with the front fenders that I am not that big of a fan of. I don't know. They're just too thin. Some of you might like this, but for me, I thought it would be a little bit wider. And that's my worry, is that if I install these, they might become permanent. So what's the solution? Well, in the front, it's a little bit easier to tackle because you can reach behind the body panel, which means I don't have to put riv nuts in these holes and make it a permanent install. What I'm going to do instead is just use regular nuts, bolts, and washers to hold the fender in place. Now, that's not really ideal. You don't want to be relying on nuts, bolts, and washers to hold your fender there. But I think it'll be secure enough until I actually make a decision which front fenders I want without already ruining the holes in here with riv nuts that don't work with a new fender, if that makes sense. The rear, a lot more complicated, because in the rear, the only ones where you can reach behind the panel are these two holes. So for these two holes here, I'll be using the same setup as I'm doing in the front, using nuts, bolts, and washers. But for the rest of these holes, you can't access it from behind because the tub is in the way, which means you can't get behind the panel and put a nut there and do the same kind of setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go online and I'm going to look at the fenders that I've wanted, watch the install for those, and find out which of these holes they actually use to mount their fenders, and that's where I'll put the riv nuts. I'm just praying that if I decide to buy those bumpers and switch the Oedro ones out, that the holes will line up nicely, because many times when you do fender installs, there are some modifications that are gonna be needed. And I can't do that if there are already riv nuts in place. I wanna try to minimize whatever is permanent. So if I can manage to maybe only use 1 or 2 riv nuts here and there just to hold the Oedro ones in place, that's probably what I'm going to do, so that later, if I decide to switch it out, I didn't do too many alterations to this thing that now I'm at the point where I can't switch them out anymore. So let's go do that. Let's install the fronts first, because that'll be a little bit easier just using nuts and bolts, and let's see how it looks.
I decided I would only add riv nuts to 4 holes in the rear. Using a step-up drill bit, I drilled out the holes slightly bigger so the riv nuts would fit, then used touch-up paint to prevent those holes from rusting.
Alright, riv nuts. Riv nuts are super easy to install if you just do yourself a favor and buy a riv nut tool. A lot of people say, well, I'm not going to buy a tool if I'm just going to use it for this one job. You'll be surprised how many times you have to add riv nuts to something. Basically, what you're doing with riv nuts is you're inserting this into a hole and then using a tool to squish the end of this so that it kind of sandwiches itself inside your hole. Oedro gives you this, and a lot of companies actually give you this. It's just a simple, very basic tool that you can use where you would use different wrenches to bring this in and clamp it up. This is a pain in the butt, and that's why a lot of people hate putting riv nuts. All you got to do with the riv nut tool is just make sure that it's open. Screw the riv nut all the way in to the ends. Stick that into here and then close it. There you go. Took 2 seconds. Okay, so here are the inner fenders. It comes in 4 pieces. You have a main piece for one side and then a piece that attaches to it like that. And then you have your other main piece on the other side, and then the piece to it attaches like that. First impressions, I think it's nice. It's fine. It's cut pretty well. There were some imperfections that I saw that shouldn't be there. I know that on one panel there was a little bend that I had to use pliers to kind of straighten back out. And then in the folds, there were parts where the paint had scraped off and revealing the aluminum underneath. And then I see also in another area where it looks like they try to use touch-up paint because it's uneven there. Now, are those really deal breakers? Probably not, because this is going to get dirty under there anyway, and you probably won't notice it. And what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to spray over all of this with some spray paint just to kind of even everything out. Now, what I didn't like, what actually bothered me a little bit, were these things. Like, I'm not so against the design. I would have rather they put their own logo on there or something, but I'm just not feeling the whole Star Wars Death Star look. Like the design itself doesn't bother me, but what bothered me was the fact that you made it red. And many of us may not want red in our vehicles. Sure, you can paint it, but if you wanted to paint this a different color outside of black by spray painting the whole thing, you would have to take these out, paint it, and put it back on. Which brings me to the next thing that irked me was the fact that they riveted these in permanently. Why don't you have it so that we can remove it, paint it, then put it back on? So what I'm gonna do, and make it easy, is I'm just gonna take my drill and I'm gonna pop these rivets out, take the red completely out, and just have it open, which might work to my advantage because now I'll get venting from the engine compartment to the outside. So I'm just gonna use these as vents and take the red out completely, and that should solve it, and we can just move forward.
For the inner fender liner assembly, use the two provided M6 bolts, a lock washer, and a washer to join the two pieces together. Then use the provided M8 bolt, a lock washer, and a washer to attach the Z brackets to the end. Do not over tighten any of these bolts yet because you'll need them loose enough to adjust them during the install if needed. To install them, I started by using one bolt at the top to hold the fender loosely in place. Then I adjusted the Z bracket to reach a hole on the side. Word of caution, this was the bracket that gave me the most trouble. I then added the other bolts, and once I got the thread started on all of them, I tightened them all up. Another word of caution, one hole in particular did not line up with any of the factory holes on the Jeep.
What did I say in the beginning? I said you're not fooling me again. Before I did this install, my friend Chris, who you've seen in all of my other videos, helped me with the lift, all that good stuff. He said if you're going to do fenders and you plan to switch them out later, then you better be careful and do your research, because once you start adding riv nuts, like that's it. And had I not listened, I would have installed these things permanently, shot myself in the foot, and lost all chances of ever switching them out in the future. See, that's the truth about fenders. Be careful when making your decision, and then plan accordingly so you don't get super excited, mount something on permanently, and now you can't go back. Like I said, I know my Jeep. I knew what this mod would entail once I removed the stock fenders and crossed the line of no return. But let me make this clear that none of this is on Oedro. Like, at all. In fact, I think they make a pretty solid product, minus some of the imperfections here and there, but they're workable. All fenders, no matter what you get, are going to look and mount differently. That's just the nature of the beast. And you can hold up that part next to your vehicle all you want, or you can scour the web for every photo you can find, but you won't really know how something will look on your rig until the old part comes off and the new part is test fitted in place. So if you're not sure, then make sure you plan your build accordingly so you don't ruin any future chances you might have of switching them out. But okay, pros and cons. The pros, I think they look good. Super simple, not a lot of frills, and it's very clean. I also like the finish on it. I think the finish on it was probably my favorite part because it just has a nice textured coating on it. And what I really liked was the fact that all the holes on these fenders just lined up with the factory holes on the Jeep. Like, I didn't have to drill out any holes. I didn't have to do some modifications to make it fit. It all lined up really nice, which is hard to find because sometimes when you buy less expensive parts, sometimes you could tell they're knockoffs. You can tell that, yeah, you guys didn't even think this through. You just took something, copied the design, and then mass produced it for cheap. But somehow or the other, these ones, they line up really, really well. Plus, what I really liked, which is one of the main purposes of why you would get fenders like this, is because of that increased ground clearance. I now have much more room in that wheel well for more articulation, although I might have to go to 35s. because the 33s in this wide open wheel well just is starting to look tiny. So I know I might have to go to 35s and fill in that gap a little bit, which then means I have to get gearing, but that's neither here nor there. Now, another thing that I really liked was that these are made of steel and yet they're super light. There are a ton of steel fenders out there and they're heavy because they're meant to take a hit. These, I don't think will stand up very well if you hit it up against a rock or a tree, but what I did not want to do was add any more weight to the Jeep than I already have, and these just fit the bill. I think they weigh just about as much as my stock Fenders did, so I'm not really adding any more weight to this than I needed to. I also really like the price point. In the beginning, I think I said they were 200 bucks. I was way off. They're actually only 144 bucks, and that's for all 4 fenders. And if you want the inner fenders for the fronts, those run $149. But if you want to buy all of it, they package it all together for $275. That's not bad at all. Speaking of the inner fenders, they're good. I mean, outside of that Star Wars looking design, I can live with it. I'm just glad I was able to take those red plates out of the back, and that really set off the look more, so I don't have this Death Star looking design motif on my fenders. Other than that, they do their job well. They really finish the look of that fender, and it protects and hides all the things behind it. Now, what didn't I like? Well, I think the build could be massively improved. On the outer fenders, those welds look really sloppy. Now, the one thing that really irked me about this was that these fenders did not come with some sort of foam protection backing to put in between the fenders and the body of your vehicle to protect the paint and reduce the vibrations. That's metal on metal, so number one, that's going to start to chip away at your paint and give you grinds and scratches, and that's never a good thing. And number two, metal on metal, eventually that's going to start to creak. Now, I have been driving it around for a couple of days with these things on and I have yet to hear anything, but it's also just installed. So meaning everything is still tight. But eventually, once I start hitting more bumps, those bolts are going to start to loosen up a little bit and eventually I might hear some creaking. I'm going to have to keep tightening these up or DIY some sort of foam protection backing so I can protect my paint. Also, there's no side marker lights, but that's to be expected with fenders this thin, and that's not just on Oedro. Many companies who make these thin style fenders, you are giving up that side marker light or you're going to need to find a way to fabricate one on there. Now for the inner fenders, I got a lot of gripes about that outside of Star Wars. One, only 4 out of the 5 mounting holes on there line up with factory holes. So there's one bolt on both sides that is not lining up with the factory hole that's there. Now I can go and take a drill and drill out a hole in there and make it work. But again, I don't want to make any modifications to the vehicle and ruin my chances later if I switch these things out. Also the Z bracket, that little bracket that holds one of the sides of your inner fenders to your vehicle, that was a pain in the like I just could not get the holes to line up, and every time I tried to move it, there was just not enough play. If they're gonna redesign these inner fenders, then you need to make that Z bracket a little bit more adjustable. Give us more play so that we can actually get it in there and then get the bolt started, and then we can tighten everything down to fit snugly. Now my biggest gripe about these inner fender liners is that Oedro never made ones for the rears. They only made inner fender liners for the front, which means now I have to go look for rear inner fender liners that sort of match the look and finish of the front. It's not impossible, but it's hard because a lot of companies, they have their own designs. They make all 4, and sometimes they put their logos or their own designs on them. So if I only buy the rear ones from one particular company, having a different set from a different company in the front, that just might look funny because it won't match up fully. I think what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to fork up my own money and buy a set of 4 inner fender liners from one particular company, just so I can have a uniform look all throughout. So the $1,000,000 question, do I like them? Strangely enough, they've sort of kind of grown on me by like a lot. I think it was the initial shock of removing the larger fenders and then just seeing the side of the Jeep just bare like that, and then test fitting some really thin fenders onto them. I just wasn't used to the look of the Jeep being that skinny. But now that I've had it on for a couple of days and I'm looking at it, I'm actually kind of digging it. I mean, I am still kind of torn because, I don't know, I think for the fronts, I would like it to be just a little bit wider. Not as wide as the OEM ones and definitely not as thick, but just something a little bit more substantial just to kind of fill out the look in the front. Bottom line, I like them, but I don't love them. I like them enough to keep on. I think I'm good. At least now I don't have to fork up any money to get the actual Fenders I want. I can use that money and address all the other needs of this build and then circle back around to this later on and see if I want to go ahead and switch. But for this setup, the way it is, I think I'm good. So why did I still release this video if I'm not 100% sold? Well, because I promised to always be honest. This was a product that fell in my lap, so I wanted to make sure I gave you an honest review, be honest about the challenges, and be honest about the mistakes I'm making so that you don't have to make them. Because yeah, I may not be gushing over these Fenders or falling head over heels in love with them, but for some of you, this might be the style you're looking for, and at these price points, these might be the ones you actually go out and buy. If you're going for that look, that barely there Fender look, or if you're outfitting a dedicated off-road Jeep where you need a lot of clearance, a lot of articulation, and you want to put Fenders on there versus having nothing at all, but at the same time, you don't want to invest a whole ton of money knowing they're going to get beat up and ripped apart anyway, then you cannot go wrong with these. Either way, I hope you found this video informative. I know it was super long, but there was just a lot of ground to cover outside of just installing and reviewing these particular Fenders. I do want to thank Oedro for sending them over to me. I actually really like them and I'm glad that I was able to try them out on my Jeep. I did put the links in the description below if any of you want to purchase them as well. And if you did find this video helpful, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and also consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to make content like this. And as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at BaptismOverland. My name is Asia Sampson, and I will see you next time.